Hey, I'm Daria. Welcome back to the channel. I'm excited to share a fun project with you, making this beautiful cozy quilted coat perfect for colder weather. It's made from pre-quilted fabric, so you can jump straight into sewing without the extra quilting work. Plus, there's no need for interfacing like you typically use with standard coating fabrics. The result is a lightweight yet super warm coat, making it the coziest coat ever. I'm using my new pattern for this project, the Cozy Cover Coat. Well, it's not exactly new to me. I've already made a couple of coats with my original draft, and they are my absolute favorites. So I'm happy to offer to you this successful pattern too. The Cozy Cover Coat features a belt to accentuate the waist and has a drop shoulder silhouette with tube sleeves that are easy to set in. The coat also has diagonal well pockets with Topstitching and a vent opening for walking ease. If you're not confident in your sewing skills, you can skip the well pockets and vent, but I would encourage you to challenge yourself. Hope you are excited to get started, but first I want to apologize for any blurry moments in this video as I had some issues with the camera focus. I'm using this pre-quilted fabric with horizontal stitching. Also, I have chosen thread matching to the quilting stitching the most. For the coat lining, I recommend going with a fabric that's on a heavier side. I'm using heavy viscose lining for mine. I'm preparing the pattern pieces. I'm folding the fabric in half lengthwise with the wrong side inside. It's easier to cut padded fabric from the right side. I make sure the fabric stripes match up and pin in some places, so they match up at the seams just as I want them. I cut the main pieces so they are match up with the stitch line and the hem. I suggest cutting the main pieces first, and then after the pockets and the main assembly is done and everything looks right, cut the lining pieces. Before sewing, test if you can press your fabric at all, especially on the wrong side. Mine is fine on a low heat, as well as there was a care label when I bought it. Anyway, press the padded fabric lightly and as little as possible, and if possible use only the tip of the iron. Also check how good open seams will look. Mine are good and flat, but if your pattern is too thick, maybe consider removing batting from the seam allowances after stitching, like this. Keep finishing all the open seams throughout the coat by following your chosen method. Also, it's important to see if your chalk or marking pen can be removed from the right side. My soap-based chalk left an oily stain, but the pink chalk marks come off easily, so I'm using that. Mark the pocket placement, lengthening the lines a little bit, and the button position on the front pieces. If chalk or a pen won't work, then mark them with basting stitch lines by hand. Optionally, you can base the central line and the collar roll line as well. For the pocket area, I'm applying a piece of non-stretch interfacing to the wrong side of the front, aligning it so that the pocket well rectangle is approximately centered on the interfacing. I'm making it with the help of the pins. Prepare the pocket well by interfacing it with the non-stretch interfacing and apply fusible stay tape to the neckline on the wrong side of the both front and back pieces to prevent any stretching. I can flatten these sections a bit as there will be a bulk of the collar seam allowances. If you can't press it on the wrong side at all, use a sew-on straight tape for the neckline. Before sewing, I suggest lowering the presser foot pressure. I will stitch with these regular size 90 needles. No need to use thicker ones, and they might leave the holes. I also recommend setting up stitching so that it will look similar to the pre-made quilting lines. If your fabric has quilting stitching that unravels especially easy at the raw edges, stitch 5 or 7 mm away from all raw edges, like I'm going to do with the facing, using a short stitch length. I do it on the section where the batting is still not attached to the edge at all. Fold the welt piece in half, wrong sides together, and stitch 5 mm away from the raw edges to secure. Press them flattening a bit. Matching notches, stitch the lower pocket back to the pocket facing, right sides together, with a 1 cm wide seam allowance. Press the seam allowance toward the back and understitch it on the lower back piece. I prefer understitching before pressing. Imagine how your hand will go into the pocket. It means you need to stitch the welt opposite. Draw a line 5 cm from the finished edge of the welt so you know that the welt will turn out exactly this wide. Pin the welt to the right side of the front piece. Just mark a line with the lower line of the marked pocket rectangle so that the raw edge of the welt is 1 cm higher than the line on the front piece. Draw the intersection lines of the pocket rectangle on the welt as well. The intersection should be perfectly matched with the pocket rectangle corners. Stitch the welt piece to the front along the new marker line on the welt, starting and stopping with the needle exactly at chalk mark intersection points, which match with the pocket rectangle corners. I'm checking if the stitch line length is exactly the same as the rectangle width on the pattern. Again, imagine where the facing will be when you are putting the hand in the pocket and turn it on the wrong side. The seam will be placed here 1 cm from the edge. It should match with the higher rectangle line, but at the same time it should be 5 cm away from the welt seam line. So the edge of the facing itself should be 4 cm from the welt stitching line. Double check if a line is 5 cm from the welt stitch line. Draw the intersection lines of the pocket rectangle on the facing as well. The intersections should be perfectly matched with the pocket rectangle corners. Stitch the facing starting and stopping with the needle exactly at the marking intersection points. Again, double check if there are 5 cm between the stitch lines. Pin the upper pocket back to the front, aligning it exactly over the attached felt piece. Turn everything on the wrong side and stitch along exactly the welt attachment line for all 3 layers. I'm pinning the lower pocket back to keep it out of the way. It's important to be precise with your stitching here. Do not stitch even 1 mm further than the end of the welt attachment line. This is how it looks from the right side. Now the most worrying part, cutting the pocket opening. I'm marking the lines where I'll be making the cuts. I prefer making it from the right side. I'm starting at the center of the rectangle and drawing up to the stitch ends. Cut the front piece of the layout fabric only. Don't cut through the welt or pocket pieces. Start at the center and stop exactly 1 mm away from the corners. Be careful not to cut the stitch lines, but avoid stopping too far from the stitching, as this won't create a neat finished result either. Turn all pocket pieces to the inside for the cut opening. Pin or hand baste the welt piece to the facing piece so that the welt's corners are exactly aligned to the upper part of the opening and the welt is laying flat. Make sure the rectangles on the sides are fully inside as well. Check that corners are neat with no holes or folds. Fold the front piece parallel to the side of the pocket and there's such a triangle piece. Make sure the welt piece is exactly matched with the upper corner. This is crucial. I should stitch all the layers between these 2 points now. Stitch on the triangle only, starting right at the cut, and not going further into the upper pocket back piece. If you won't start right at the cut and stitch too close, there will be a fold on the corner. Try making this stitch as straight as possible. Make the same on the second side. Just after the stitching, there could be the tiniest folds on the corners, even if you had done everything right. If they disappear after you pull them with your fingers, then they disappear after the top stitching. So there actually aren't any folds. I believe this is because of the batting thickness. This is how the pocket looks on the wrong side. Press the seam allowances of the facing open. Press the upper back and the pocket itself. Trim the large front piece seam allowances to 1 or 1.5 centimeters. Pin the facing and lower pocket back to the front of the coat to keep it out of the way as you're top stitching. Top stitch along the bottom of the welt, catching the upper pocket back only. Don't backstitch at the beginning or end of your stitching, but leave thread tails instead to make a knot later. I'll show you how and why. On the wrong side, pull the upper thread to the wrong side. Pull the lower thread and the little loop of the upper thread will appear. Pull this thread so the both threads are on the wrong side and knot several times. I make 3 knots. This allows you to connect it with the other top stitching line to create a single stitch line later. We will use this several times for the coat. It is neater than backstitching. You see, the tiny folds on the corners are gone already. Pin the upper and the lower pocket backs together, making sure they are aligned well. Stitch the pocket backs together with a 1 cm wide seam allowance. To reinforce the seam, use a smaller stitch length and stitch the seam twice. Top stitch along the both sides of the welt. Start your first stitch exactly on the last stitch of the horizontal top stitching to blend the 2 top stitching lines into one line. Don't backstitch at the start of your stitching, but leave thread tails instead to make a knot. Backstitch near the pocket opening. Again, pull the upper thread to the wrong side and knot several times. The top stitching looks like a single line now. Make the same on the both sides. Press the finished pocket lightly, as well as the pocket back separately. Pin the back pieces right sides together along the center back seam, matching notches. I also matched the quilting line to have this result. Stitch between the neckline and the vent. Mark the seam allowances next to the vent corner so you know where to stop your stitching. Transfer this marking from the pattern piece. Stitch with a 1.5 cm wide seam allowance here. Stitch a padded fabric slowly with a longer stitch length and align the main fabric's layer edges, not batting. Press the center back seam open. Let's prepare the vent section. The vent section will be towards the right, looking from the wrong side, or towards the left back piece. Here I have the left back piece already trimmed by 4 cm. So trim 4 cm from the left back piece along the vent, leaving 5 cm on the left side. Fold it over 5 cm and press. Fold the right side over 5 cm towards the side seam and press. Clip the seam allowance on the right back piece at the corner. The top band edges should be aligned, so every side is 5 cm wide and the finished band will be 4 cm wide after the lining is attached. Matching notches, stitch the front and the back pieces right sides together and the side seams with a 1.5 cm seam allowance. Press the side seam open. Press the seam in sections, working with the sections before and after the curved armhole and the remaining side seam separately. Flip the side seams on the rounded underarm sections for 3 or 4 times. The notches, stitch the shoulder seams the same way with a 1.5 seam allowance and press. My fluffy friend found this coat quite cozy already. This is what I do when I notice some quilting stitch lines started to come undone. I just backstitch them on the seam allowance. Let's prepare the hem at once by folding up 5 cm. I cut pieces so that the hem is matching the stitch line, so it's easy to me. It's even better to hand-baste. I do it in the middle so I still can attach lining along the edge. Check the coat length and adjust as needed later. Let's move to the collar. First, check to make sure all the notches are marked. I marked the lower collar with a cross to avoid swapping the pieces later. Matching notches, pin the lower and the upper collar right sides together along the collar edge. These are notches on the side that are crucial to match. Insert the pin exactly at the side notch, pin perpendicular to the edge. Working from the lower collar piece side, start stitching next to one notch and add at the opposite notch, using where the pins are inserted to know where to start and stop your stitching. Stitch the collar edge with a 1.5 cm seam allowance. Clip into the seam allowance at these notches, being sure not to cut past your stitching. Trim the corners. Trim the lower collar batting if your quilted fabrics allows it, or the seam allowances on the stitch sections to approximately 6 or 7 mm, leaving the seam allowance below the collar stitching point hole. Additionally, trim the batting around the corner from both seam allowances. Turn the collar right side out and push the corners out to create sharp points. Again, I mark the lower collar for myself. This is optional, but I press the collar edge seam open. This will help to create a neat edge when it's turned to the right side. Press the collar edge only, rolling slightly so the lower collar isn't visible from the right side. Don't press too much not to ruin the batting. To top stitch the collar edge, first don't backstitch. Leave thread tails to make a knot later instead. Working from the upper collar side, start your stitching just at the raw seam allowance. Top stitch 1 cm from the edge. Go slowly, making sure the lower collar isn't visible from the right side. I push the seam out all the way I go and follow the marking on the sewing machine attentively, and I do it on every top stitch on this coat. Again, stop just on the raw edge and don't backstitch. Pull the upper thread to the lower collar side and knot several times. This will allow it to blend with the later top stitching on the lapel to create a single stitch line. Here's the end. press Topstitching lightly. Check to see if the upper collar is large enough by folding the collar lengthwise with the lower collar on the inside and noting if there is any excess lower collar fabric at the center neck section. If there is, trim the excess gradually. This is necessary so the collar can fall on the back of the neck correctly. Align the raw edges of the collar and base 5 mm away from the edge, joining the upper and lower collar to create one piece. And again, taking in consideration that the upper collar will be slightly bigger than the lower collar. Trim the seam allowances of the shoulder seams and the center back seam at the neckline to avoid bulk. With the lower collar to the right side of the body, match the notches. The raw edge of the collar should be placed right next to the notch on the lapel. Stitch the collar to the assembled body along the raw edges with the 1.5 cm wide seam allowances. Work slowly on the rounded sections and let your hands help you to ease the collar here. So this is how the collar looks just sewn in. Check the starting and the ending points. This seam will be covered by the facing piece. Check one more time that the collar is placed right next to the notch on the lapel. Clip the seam allowance on the front piece only for 3 or 4 times on the rounded sections. Press the seam allowance towards the body. Also, with the tip of an iron, I flatten the seam bulk from the right side. It's hard to attach the bulky belt loops, so I removed the batting from the belt loop piece. Fold the long edges of the belt loop piece 1 cm towards the center and press. Fold the piece in half one more time and stitch 1 or 2 mm along the outer folded edge to enclose the seam allowance. Repeat the stitching along the other edge. Press the piece and cut the piece in half. Also, I've decided to heat seal the ends. Working from the wrong side, place a pin exactly at the side seam waist notches so that the pin is visible from the right side. Make the marking 3 cm above the pin and 3 cm below the pin. Fold over 1 cm on each end of each belt loop piece and stitch to the markings. As my sleeve turned out and attached to the batting on the hem, I will make a basting stitch line here. Working from the front side of the sleeve, stitch the sleeve seams right sides together with a 1.5 cm seam allowance. Press the seams open using a sleeve pressing board, and right now it's convenient to prepare the hem by folding up 5 cm and pressing lightly and then hand basting. Check the length and adjust as needed later. Trim the seam allowances at the armhole to avoid bulk. Insert the sleeves into the armhole, right sides together, match the notches and the seams. Stitch from the sleeve side with a 1.5 cm seam allowance. When stitching, avoid stretching the armhole by following the natural curve. Press the seam open just on the sleeve cap section. I also do it lightly from the right side. Time for the lining. Matching notches, pin the front facing pieces to the front lining pieces, right sides together. Note that the lining fabric should be eased along the seam, so be sure to stitch it with the facing piece up. Stitch with the 1 cm wide seam allowance. These wrinkles on the lining should appear. This means you have done everything right. Just press the seam allowances toward the lining. Matching notches, stitch the lining center back seam from the neckline to the vent with a 1 cm wide seam allowance. Here it is, and to stitch the pleat on the center back, match the notches and stitch 3 cm down from the neckline notch, gradually tapering your stitching to the center back seam. It should look approximately so, and I will follow my marking. The center back seam allowance is pressed towards the right piece, and the pleat should be too. So we have to press the pleat bulk down to create a loose dot. Between the vent and the fold you just stitch at the neckline, press gradually tapering to no fold at the vent. This pleat is very important for allowing free movement. Right now is a perfect time to stitch a hanger loop. I use this fine gross-grain ribbon. You can use any ribbon or quickly make one from the unpadded main fabric or lining. If you have a label, add it to the center back as well. While the back lining piece is flat and unattached, let's prepare the lining for the vent, which will be attached along the vent sides. I work from the right side of the lining, so the right back piece appears on the right. We should trim 4 cm from the right back along the vent, leaving 1 cm seam allowance down the vent stitch line. I mark 4 cm along the edge and 1 cm from the stitch line and then trim along that marking. This line is marked on the pattern piece as well. So here is how it should look. Match the notches and stitch the front and the back lining pieces together at the shoulder seams and the side seams, right sides together. Leave an unstitched opening of approximately 40 cm somewhere on one side. Stitch with a 1 cm wide seam allowance and clip on the curved section. Press the side seams and the shoulder seams towards the back. Press the seam allowances on the unstitched section towards the pieces. Match the notches and stitch the lining sleeve seams. Press the seam allowance toward the back of the sleeve lining using a sleeve pressing board. Match the notches and set the sleeve linings into the lining body with a 1 cm seam allowance. Press the seam allowance towards the sleeve. To attach the lining, we should place the assembled lining and the assembled main body right sides together, sandwiching the collar in between. Matching the shoulder seams and the center backs and stitch along the neckline. Stitch with the 1.5 cm wide seam allowance and work from the lining side. Go slowly and be sure the lapel notches match perfectly. I want to show a situation you should avoid. Here the lapel looks incorrect. There shouldn't be any gap. So if you have a situation like this, redo this section. So this is how it should look. Clip the seam allowance of the facing on the rounded sections. I also suggest trimming the bedding from the one collar attachment seam allowance or even from both. Press the seam towards the body, flattening the seam. I also press the lapel seam open in advance. Align the edges of the front facing and the center front, right sides together and matching notches. Stitch with a 1.5 cm wide seam allowance, leaving approximately 15 cm from the bottom unstitched. As this corner will be trimmed later, start stitching from the stitch line. The collar and the sleeves will be sandwiched between the layers. These pieces won't be aligned at the hem, but measure 15 cm from here and stitch above it. The bottom will be sewn later. Trim the lapel corners. Additionally, trim the bedding around the corner from both seam allowances. Clip into the seam allowance at the lapel's break. Trim the front piece seam allowances on the lapel section or just the bedding to approximately 6 or 7 mm as we did with the collar. Press the lapel seam open as much as you can. This will help to create a neat edge when it's turned right side out. I pressed the front seam open at once as well. Turn the lapels right side out and push the corners out to create sharp points. Now we should insert the sleeve linings into the main sleeves. While inserting, it will turn out with the wrong side to the main sleeve and we will see the wrong side at the hem. Make sure that the sleeve linings aren't twisted. I pin the seam together, reach for the hem opening in between the lining and the main garment. Turn the garment sleeves inside out. The sleeve and its lining are right sides together now. I re-pin at the matching seams so the sleeves are right sized together now. Match hem edges and stitch the sleeve and sleeve lining together along the hem. This is the basting stitch. Fold the sleeve hem along the pre-pressed fold line and finish the sleeve hems with a blind hem stitch. Alternatively, you can top stitch from the hem fold on the right side, making sure not to catch the lining in your stitching. Turn the sleeve right side out. Here's how the hem looks in the finished way. I can remove the basting already. Press the lining and the sleeve hems, creating a fold like this. Working from the opening at the bottom of the coat, between the lining and the main garment. Match the lining sleeve cap seam allowance with the main sleeve cap seam allowance at the top of the sleeve cap and join them together with a few loose hand basting stitches. Don't pull the thread too much. The same way, attach the lining to the underarm. Through the opening at the bottom, match the lining sleeve seam allowance with the main sleeve allowance and the underarm and join them together with a few stitches. The seam allowances should be pressed towards the sleeve. Let's finish the vent. Here's the lining from the wrong side. To make sewing the vent easier, make 1 cm seam allowance into section marking on the lining. This marking corresponds to the marking on the pattern piece. This is the vent on the main garment. Check if the vent sides are 5 cm wide. Also, I trim batting a little bit to have the perfect edges. Mark the 1 cm wide seam allowances on the right vent. This point is very important to make a neat vent. These 2 points should be perfectly matched later. So check if they both are exactly 4 cm away from the back seam. First, I finish the vertical edges. Place the garment like this to see which side should be attached to which edge. Right sides together, align the vertical vent edges of the right back lining piece and the left back piece. Match the seam allowance into section perfectly. To do so, I insert the pin through the 2 points perpendicular not to shift them, and then insert pins somewhere next to the first pin. Then remove the perpendicular pin and starting exactly from this point, stitch with a 1 cm wide seam allowance, leaving approximately 15 cm from the bottom unstitched. The bottom edges won't be aligned so far. Straighten the fabric so that nothing gets in the way. Turn the band right side out. It should look like this, and now we have to make the same with the second side. I suggest marking the seam allowances on this one side as well. Place the horizontal vent seam allowance towards the top, and match this vent start point with the marking we just made on the main vent left side. Align the raw vertical edge of the right back piece and the center back edge of the left back lining, right sides together. Stitch with a 1 cm wide seam allowance. Make sure you catch onto the right back piece and not the other side of the vent. Start approximately 15 cm from the bottom, finish exactly at the vent start point. This is how the stitch looks, and it should appear to be as a single stitch line with the center back seam. Turn the vent to the right side. The bottom of the sides are still unstitched. The vent start will be covered by the lining, but to do so, first clip the corner of the lining from the wrong side on the right side of the vent. Be careful and don't cut the stitch line. Now the lining vent start can be folded towards the top, and we can see how the vent will look when finished. Working from the lining side, press the vent sides with a seam allowance toward the edges. Align the vent sides perfectly and pin to secure. Now carefully fold the lining seam allowance at the vent start towards the top. Press it lightly. Now one of the options to finish the opening with the blind hand stitches and then the top stitch, but I suggest securing it from the wrong side. So everything is done right, the vent start looks like this from the wrong side. Match all the layers and stitch right in the lining's fold, starting and stopping between the stitch points. I secure the corner with a pin and now should match the vent side point with the center back seam end. Again, to match these points perfectly, I insert the pin exactly through 2 points perpendicular not to shift them, and then insert pins somewhere next to the first pin. And I carefully stitch the vent start between 2 points. Press the vent start from the wrong side. To top stitch the vent through all the layers along the horizontal lining attaching line, you should perfectly match the vent start through all the layers. I insert pins in these 2 points to transfer this line on the right side. 1 point should appear exactly on the vent start opening. Transfer these points and pin in place. Mark the vent top stitch line 1 or 2 mm under the points. When I stitch, I won't catch the lining this way. Alternatively, you can make a diagonal top stitch line starting from the vent opening. Make a double stitch line. Start at the vent start point, stitch horizontally, turn and stop at the vent start point again. Alternatively, stitch from the wrong side along the lining fold. This is how it looks from the right side, and it looks neat from the wrong side as well. If everything's done correctly, there should be an excess of the lining above the vent, and this is crucial. Every time you press the vent, secure the sides with the pin. Also, I flattened the edge of the bottom side a little bit to reduce the bulk. Look, quality control decided towards me. The next step is to finish the hem, and we are going to start with the bent corners. To finish the bent corners, use a fabric marker or chalk to mark where the both edges meet and intersect. Unfold the edges and mark with a chalk where the pressed fold lines intersect. Fold the piece so that the right sides are together and make the markings on the edges. Use a fabric marker or chalk to make a diagonal line from the previously made markings to the intersection of the fold lines. Stitch along the marked line to create the corner seam, but stop 1 cm from the edge, leaving the seam allowances unstitched. Trim the corner seam to have a 1 cm wide seam allowance, and then trim the corner. Remove the padding from the seam allowances to avoid bulk. Press this seam allowance open. Turn the corner right side out and make a sharp point. You see, the seam allowances are left unstitched to attach the lining to them later. Press from the wrong side. Repeat the process for the outer corner of the vent. Align the vertical edge of the lining with the vent edge of the main garment, right sides together. Stitch the lining down along the vertical edges, starting from the previously made stitch line and stopping right at the unstitched corner of the seam allowance. This is the way it should be. Fold the lining and the hem like this, creating a pleat from the lining axis. The difference between the main hem and the lining's hem in finished way will be approximately 1.5 cm. Turn the new formed corner inside out, facing the lining's wrong side. Align the horizontal row hem edges of the lining and the main garment right sides together. With a 1 cm wide seam allowance, stitch the lining down along the whole hem, starting from the unstitched corner of the vent and matching the side seams. Finish at the front corner. Look how neat lining's finish looks. You can hand stitch this small opening if you want. Trim the corner and remove bedding from the facing bottom seam allowance to avoid bulk. Fold the hem along the pre-pressed hem fold to the wrong side, creating a pleat from the facing axis. The pleat should be towards the bottom. Attach the facing to the lapel at the unstitched section with a 1.5 cm wide seam allowance. Press the front seam open. Trim the facing seam allowance on the section below the lapel breakpoint to approximately 6 or 7 mm, or just the batting if your quilted fabrics allows it. Trim the corner and remove batting. Fold the part of the hem that is attached to the lining along the pre-pressed fold line. Working from the remaining opening and the side seam, finish the hem with blind hand stitches. Alternatively, you can top stitch from the right side. Turn the entire garment right side out and push the corners out. Align two pre-pressed edges of the lining at the unstitched section of the side seam and stitch 1 mm from the edges to close the opening. Press the lining and the hem so that's folded approximately 1.5 cm above the hem. Press the lapel's edge lightly. Be careful not to ruin the batting. Top stitch the lapel edge starting the first stitch exactly on the last stitch of the upper color top stitching to blend the two top stitching lines into one line. Stitch 5 mm away from the notch point first, and then start top stitching on the facing side 1 cm from the edge along the lapel, stopping approximately 1 cm on the lapel's break point. Don't backstitch at the start and the end, but leave thread tails instead to make knots later. These are those threads, and this is 1 cm from the lapel's breakpoint. Pull the lower thread to the facing side and knot several times to secure. The top stitching on the collar and the lapel will look like a single stitch line. Pull the upper thread to the lower collar side and knot several times to secure. Turn the garment on the right side and continue top stitching along the front line down to the hem. Top stitch the front piece starting on stopping exactly at the last stitch of the lapel's top stitching to blend the two top stitching lines into one line. Don't backstitch at the lapel's break point, but leave thread tails instead and make a knot later. Check if the collar is even. Press the lapel and facing lightly. My belt consists of one piece, as the fabric width allowed me to cut so, but if you cut the belt as two pieces, place the short ends of the both pieces right sides together and stitch and press the seam open. Fold the belt piece in half lengthwise with the right side to the inside. Stitch around the raw edges of the belt with a 1.5 cm seam allowance, leaving a 10 cm opening on the long side. Trim the corners. Press the long seam open lightly. This will help you to turn it to the right side with a neat edge. Trim the batting on the seam allowances or one seam allowance itself. Turn the belt right side out, being sure to push out the corners to create sharp points, and press. You see, the seam is already pushed out perfectly since we have previously pressed it open. Finish the opening with hand stitches. Top stitch around the whole belt 1 cm from the edge. Press the belt lightly and here it is. Mark the pattern placement on the left front piece and the right front facing, following the bottom markings. You can choose if you want to have a closure with 3 buttons or 4. Sew on the snap buttons on the left front from the right side and on the right front facing from the wrong side. Some button placement will appear on the lining, so pin it in place first. Remove all the basting stitch lines. Give the garment a final press, but do not press too hard to avoid ruining the loft of the bedding. I suggest pressing it on a dress form with the closures fastened. Insert the belt in the belt loops. I recommend tying the belt into a one-sided bow. In fact, the belt length was designed for this type of knot. The left end of the belt should be longer than the right. Cross the shorter end over the longer one. Bring the longer end down, fold the longer end in half. Tie a knot with the folded end and the other end. Gently pull both ends to tighten the knot. Ta-da! The coziest coat ever is finished. It was quite a challenge, wasn't it? If you enjoyed the video and want to support me, please leave a comment and give it a like. This video was edited down from 8 hours of footage, so I worked really hard to make this tutorial. I hope my effort wasn't in vain and that you're all just sewing your cozy coat along with me. Thank you so much for watching till the end.